Hey, welcome everyone to the ArchiCAD User Monthly Webinar for March 2019. This is your host, Eric Bobrow, speaking to you from Southern San Rafael, California, where it's a beautiful sunny day, finally, after a lot of rain. And I have a couple of special guests today, John Hallgarth. Hey, John, how are you doing?
Oh, good. Thanks for having me on, Eric.
I'm glad you'll be able to share some wonderful things, some really fascinating developments that you've done. We also will have Roderick Anderson from Costa Rica, who is just slightly delayed. So we're going to have John lead off the session. Now I'm going to show my screen and just talk a tiny bit about the background of what we're doing here. And let's see here, show this screen. There we go. Okay, so ArchiCAD user website, gathering place for users around the world, monthly webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about taking ArchiCAD beyond design, cost estimation, and construction management. So we're going to be having Roderick, who heads up a design build firm in Costa Rica that builds luxury homes in Costa Rica, Panama, the Dominican Republic, and around the Caribbean. Doing some really amazing, beautiful design, as well as very innovative management processes. John, who you see already, is going to be talking about a 5D workflow where we're taking, of course, 3 dimensions of space, 1 of time and 1 of money, making 5 dimensions, and working with ArchiCAD as the core management, modeling, central database of the model, and coordinating it with these other dimensions, including specifically quantities and cost estimations. So we're going to be looking at that. Now, ArchiCAD User is a website. Been developing that over the past year, having these monthly webinars. We took off January and February because I was tied up with another project, actually developing a whole new version of my best practices course for ArchiCAD 22, making it everything current. Now, John was on the monthly webinar in August when I had a session that was focused on templates and sharing templates from different people. And John emailed me just shortly before that session saying, hey, you know, I have a template that people might be interested in. It's rather different. It's focused on construction management because that's what John specializes in. And so here you can see him in the bottom left corner of this screen. And actually, Roderick was on that as well. We looked at, I don't know, about 3 or 4 different people's templates as well as master template. So anyway, I'm glad to have you back on, John. I'm going to switch over to have you show your screen and you can introduce your work. Let's see here. Go to here, make you presenter. And let's make sure everybody can hear us and see us. So please type in to the questions area and let us know that you can hear and see us. I usually check that as well. So Dwight says yes and yes, Tom, Maria, etc. Okay, perfect. So good. I'm glad we double checked. Now, for those of you who are in the ArchiCAD Best Practices 2020 course and the ArchiCAD coaching program, I will be keeping open the Slack workspace. For those of you who aren't part of those programs, we're, in addition to just having a regular session teaching ArchiCAD methods and the coaching program where I help ArchiCAD users with challenges applying those methods in the real life projects, we use a workspace for communication based on Slack. So some of you may use Slack for other contexts, but Slack is a great way to have many people potentially share a conversation and even share resources. We regularly share some of the files that are developed in those programs. So if you are in the 2020 course or coaching program, you can use that. And if you're not, then of course use the GoToWebinar questions area. You'll be able to type in questions. I will sometimes answer them directly just in the background to give you clarification. And sometimes I'll moderate and I'll say, hey, John, we have a question about such and such. So do participate, ask questions, and we'll get going. So John, take it away. And by the way, if you, I'll turn off my webcam, and John, leave your webcam on at least at the beginning while you're introducing your work. But if you do want to hide the webcams in GoToWebinar, you can use an option under the, let's see, it's under the window menu or webcams. It says a webcam menu, I think, at least on my screen, and it says, hide all webcams. So you can look under one of the menus and go to webinar or go to meeting to say, hey, I just want to look at what's on screen. So John, take it away. Tell us about your work in general and then what we're going to be looking at today.
Great. Well, thanks again, Eric, for having me back. Definitely excited to be here and be presenting one of the workflows that I've developed for how to really extract meaningful reports from within ArchiCAD and how to link that up into an estimate template, which is really important to be able to do in order to have something that's, kind of standardized and something that you can work on populating for each project that you want to estimate. So, so what do I do? Well, really, I come from the commercial construction side of the industry. I worked for a large general contractor here in California for almost 10 years before branching off and pursuing this ArchiCAD template that I've been working on recently called ContraBIM. But really, I do services as well as develop templates. On the services side here, I kind of do a wide range of different BIM related services, whether it's helping with early on proposals or various types of design modeling or subcontractor modeling. I've done a lot of laser scanning, a lot of field technology in terms of different types of layouts and different ways of getting technology into the field. And then I also do, kind of one-on-one trainings, some different workshops, and kind of a wide range of different BIM services. But what we'll be talking about today is really a bit in like a one component of my overall bigger ContraBIM template. So, what we're looking at right here is just kind of like, this is how I view the template that I've developed. It's really intended to help support your different tasks all the way from, the early conception of a project, really into design and into the pre-construction activities, and then take all that information developed during pre-con and really have something that you can continue forward with into the field operations. Then ultimately, you generate all this great information during the design and construction of a building. You might as well use that for operations and maintenance. So, so that's really looking at the my template as a whole. I've highlighted down here in the bottom corner the kind of the cost component of that template, which is really what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into the cost estimating component, I thought it'd be maybe good just to give a quick background on the overall template and show you actually the file that we're in right now, a file that I'm using primarily for construction coordination, to kind of point out some of those other features and how I like to utilize ArchiCAD. So I think at this point, Eric, I'm going to maybe stop sharing my webcam so we can maximize the screen. And yeah, I'll turn it back on at the end if there's a good time for questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so that should be hidden. Okay, so I'm gonna flash over real quick to the full project that we're looking at. So what we're primarily focusing on here, is different levels of this existing building that's getting built out to a hotel. So it's an office building conversion into a hotel. And what we're looking at primarily are specific floors. And within each specific floor, there's some trades that are doing their own models, and I'm actually doing some modeling as well to kind of fill the gaps of for different aspects, such as new drag beams that have been added, and modeling some trades like fire protection. And so really I like using ArchiCAD as a way of being able to organize all of my different, in this case, contract documents, as well as shop drawings that we're getting from the subs. So that's really what I wanted to point out real quickly in this demonstration, is just how we can organize this to be able to bring all these different formats together in a way that you can really review it, produce different composite drawings, and really help aid the construction coordination process. So, so a few things I just want to point out here on the in the view map is this is the full template that I provide, but this design modeling is really, these are set up for if you were to actually be developing design in this type of workflow. In this case, we're not using that, so we won't really even talk about that. But where things start coming together is actually underneath the contract documents tab here, which is where for each different design discipline, I'm able to essentially create different views where all these drawings, whether it's in a PDF format or a DWG format, can be linked into ArchiCAD here. Now, this is, I'm sure, probably a workflow that a lot of people use as kind of standard practice for linking in different consultants' drawings. But for construction management, this becomes really powerful when you can start taking your backgrounds, essentially, in this case, looking at an architectural background. Say we'll go to like that level 13th floor. And then we can start overlaying these different drawings against all of our other MEP design documents. So, you know, for each different discipline, I can just open up a few of these views real quickly. We can see ductwork here as well as mechanical pipe. For say plumbing, you can go to that view and see the plumbing lines up there on the 13th floor. Fire protection, there wasn't really a design document for fire protection, but we can start producing these composite drawings that are really, really useful for just coordinating complete scopes of work in a given location. So what we're looking at here is an RCP with all the MEPs overlaid on top of it for what we have currently. And this just makes it really easy to produce these different composite drawings that you can then publish out with layers. And so you can turn on and off the different layers for different systems and use this as a nice clean document for communicating with the team. So being able to organize contract documents is one big part of it. The other side of it is the shop drawings. So for example, being able to say, look at structural steel shop drawings. In this case, these are those new drag beams that we were adding to the space. Being able to bring together progress HVAC models. This is actually a model that's it's actually a single object that's brought into here, but this is a 3D DWG that I opened as an object to bring together. And then of course, you know, for the trades that I'm helping model, such as fire protection, we can open up the fire protection here and see that particular scope. And just like we can do with the design documents, you can also just, again, overlay everything on top of each other and use this as a way of really bringing all the trades together, your different design backgrounds, and really get additional views out of the model. So one thing that's pretty cool here, I'm going to, of course, now I was worried I was going to do this and not be able to do a marquee. Let me see here. Oh, shoot. Eric, how do I get my marquee up here when I'm not, when I hid all of my design tools? I knew I was going to run into this. Let's just go, sorry, toolbox. Here we go. I just want to grab a chunk of this model. Maybe we'll grab like right through here. Show this in 3D just so you can get kind of an idea of what we're looking at. And so again, here's kind of a combination of drag beams that I added. Fire protection is all the red here, as well as that 3D DWG that we had brought in as a coordination model. So one thing I can do here is I can actually turn on a point cloud that you saw a little preview of there. And again, this is another way of just being able to bring everything together into like a nice working view to really be able to see what's going on and be able to see that, okay, I got issues here when, you know, modeling this in as the as-built or the shop drawing showed for fire protection. We're going to be hitting some, you know, drop heads or capitals here. So Anyway, I just wanted to give a quick preview of how these files, how the overall bigger template can operate. So hopefully that gives you a quick introduction into how kind of the big picture is set up for
John?
really looking at design review, submittals, trade coordination, design, of course. And this is kind of the area that I was just talking about. And this can flow, of course, all the way through into the field, and then ultimately, at the end of the day, having as-built and record documents as a way to capture all the design progression over time.
John?
So, okay, so let's,
Hey, John? John?
yeah,
So there are a couple of questions that I think would be good to at least briefly address before you move on.
sure.
From Tom Markunis, why use ArchiCAD for this workflow? Aren't there dedicated applications out there that for this? And a related question, well, somewhat related, Luis Barrios is how much has to be modeled from the consultants providing only 2D work? So I guess if the consultants are only giving you 2D, you have to model certain things to get obviously the 3D views and for quantities and things like that. So just a little bit of clarification on the workflow with consultants and the idea of using ArchiCAD as the central tool in this case.
Sure. Again, so the purpose here for me on this particular project is just, trying to coordinate these spaces as quickly as possible. So because the only thing that was modeled in 3D from the design team was essentially the architecture, which is what we saw here real quick, just with this Navis model. All the MEP consultants were doing everything in 2D, but the subcontractors in some cases are also doing some of that modeling, like HVAC, for example. How I showed that HVAC model that we got. Obviously I'm not going to be modeling something that a subcontractor is going to be modeling, but I am going to be doing select modeling, like I showed with the structural steel, the new drag beams that we added, as well as like fire protection, things that we needed to coordinate the space in some really tight areas that wasn't going to be provided by any other team member. And since I'm taking lead on coordination on this job, it's kind of my responsibility to fill some of those gaps to make sure that in some of these tight areas, we can really, make things fit and get underneath the tight spots. Like, for example, getting underneath these drag beams. Like I can see, obviously, in this case, the modeling done by subcontractor is not going to work. And so if I had to model this in, then maybe we wouldn't have picked up on that. So I think the first question was why use ArchiCAD versus other dedicated programs for this? Well, I'm using ArchiCAD certainly as like a tool to provide additional support to the effort going on in Navisworks, which is where we're bringing all available 3D content together. But Navisworks is somewhat limited in terms of how you can view 2D content. Yes, you can turn on and have 3D or view in 3D specific. Let me turn on HVAC here just for example. We can view this in Navisworks, but it's really not very useful to be able to look at it in this type of format. It's better to have the 3D models there. So again, I'm using ArchiCAD as a way to bring all that different content together in all different formats. In this case, contract documents as backgrounds, shop drawing models, additional models that I'm generating, and bring it all together, which really there isn't another program that can do all of that stuff in one package like ArchiCAD can. So not as well, at least in my opinion. So did I answer those questions, Eric?
I think well enough for now. Obviously, one can go deeper and deeper. So move on to, I guess, the core of what we wanted to look at today, which is doing the C5D cost and quantities.
Sure. So when I look at estimating in ArchiCAD, really there's a few crucial parts that I've developed that really make up the core functionality of the cost estimating workflow. So for me, the big part of it is cost properties. So having using ArchiCAD properties is really the main tool for managing cost data, as well as a bunch of other variables that go into the estimating workflow. Another crucial part of it is the quantity schedules within ArchiCAD. So I like generating these based off of loosely around CSI master format. I found is a nice clean way of just organizing a quantity reports. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. And then the other big component is the estimate template, which in this case, I'm using a macro enabled Excel file that allows me to kind of pull everything together and create a really fast and efficient link between ArchiCAD and Excel. So to dive into this a little bit deeper, how this can be really applied, it's really, for me, it all starts with properties. So having properties available such as your unit cost, specifying units, maybe different pricing packages, different factors, and really having all those underlying data and parameters available to drive the estimating workflow. So for me, properties are really essential to my workflow. There's other ways of generating some of this info, such as through IFC or through some of the native parameters that are available in the design tools themselves. But I found that properties really enable you to move data around quicker. You can import it and export it to Excel and kind of do that round trip update. And it has just become, for me, a really useful method for storing and managing all that cost data. So really the next step after you have that data available is creating cost reports. So you can see here, if I zoom in a little bit, we can see, our concretes, our masonries, our steels, our wood, thermal protection. I essentially like to mirror all the different bid packages and the CSI categories into the reports within ArchiCAD. So that's what we'll show here in a little bit. And as you do this, that's where you assign your different codes, your cost data, and you use these reports for what I call like conditioning the data. So, going through and fine tuning what information's in there and your unit pricing and how you're pricing it. So once you've dialed in your reports, then you can set up your publisher and ultimately just refresh your publisher with a link into Excel. So that's the workflow and kind of the big picture: properties, reports, and publishing with Excel. So now we'll kind of transfer over and we'll do maybe a, Eric, are we still good for maybe 15-20 minute demonstration of this workflow?
Absolutely.
Okay, on time for now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, we'll be taking a look at this project. We'll go through all these different cost reports, not all of them, but maybe just a few select ones. And then we'll look at how it is being tied into ArchiCAD. So you might have seen some of the videos that I've done in the past, and I'm thinking for this presentation, instead of walking through starting in ArchiCAD and then going to Excel, I think it might be interesting and maybe even easier to understand if we kind of start with the end in mind and then we work backwards into the model so we can see where that cost data is coming from. So I think that might be a little better way of doing this. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull up, we're going to start with the Excel estimate template that we're looking at here. So what we're looking at in this view is the CSI summary Excel estimate template. And what I want to point out here that's pretty important is on the left side here, these two columns right here, these are kind of like my standard line items that I like to use on every single project, regardless of the project type and the contents of those projects. So having a really standardized summary sheet just makes everything easier to work backwards, and so that you can fill the different scopes in a manner that's going to always be reported into this summary view. So as I scroll all the way down here, we can see we go down to division 33. So CSI does have more divisions than this, but this is really kind of the bottom line of all the essentially what I call hard costs, or costs related to the final product themselves. And then below the hard costs is where we can start adding in our general requirements, general conditions, as well as all the below the line markups that we might want to add in, so that we ultimately end up with a grand total. And we actually have a few different options here for producing different grand totals. So so with that, one thing, we'll get into these two different columns here as we take a look at the model here shortly. But all I want to point out is that everything we're looking at here, this is all being driven from ArchiCAD. And the way that we link all these different cost reports together is just through a single sheet here that actually we're creating a link just by going in and browsing and pointing it to where we are publishing from ArchiCAD here. So this is essentially a listing of all the different reports coming from ArchiCAD. And we can see the date modified. And yeah, so this is how essentially we're linking everything together. Going back to the cost reports, again, I can click on anything over here on this side is all hyperlinked. So if I click on one of these, it's going to take me to a cost report specific for, in this case, cast in place concrete. I can refresh this data. And so what it's highlighting here is this is actually the data source coming in from ArchiCAD. So if I delete this, actually, you'll see that everything on the left side here, it's all formulas being pulled directly from the data source on the right. So as I refresh, everything updates and populates. And so when I publish out from ArchiCAD, all I have to do is just refresh this sheet and then all the numbers are going to be updated. So, so again, kind of working backwards into this, I think now it's probably, with that kind of set up, maybe it's time we can jump over to our project and then we'll kind of work things the other direction from here. So just quick note, this project is, my client in this case was Sparks Reed Architecture. They're based in Oklahoma. So they approached me with a project that they had previously modeled and completed. And one of their employees or designers actually attended one of my workshops. And after the workshop, became and asked me to essentially take their existing project file here and build out the cost estimating workflow into this project file so that they could then take this exact file and reuse it on their next project of pretty much the exact same product type. So building another basketball arena essentially for, I think, the same school district is what they were wanting to use this model for. And their purpose for wanting to have this cost estimating workflow built in so that essentially they could run reports and quickly get all the quantities, and based off the pricing of this project that they were already in the middle of building, and so they had some decent unit price numbers, be able to take that similar pricing and apply it to the next project. So so to kind of walk through the steps here of how I approach this is essentially it all started with looking at the properties. So anything here that you see with a CB behind it, that stands for essentially the 5D portion of my template, or the Contrabim 5D parameters. And so we can see here that one of the big, the important parts when I look at assigning information to a model is how do you break that up into different CSI codes. So so just by using an option set here, we can assign these codes, and all of a sudden, as soon as I assign these codes to individual model elements, we're already starting to get in line with the summary estimate sheet that we had pointed out just a few minutes ago. So depending on what I assign it to here, that's automatically going to give us a really good chance of getting those elements to land on the appropriate cost reports, so that they end up in the right buckets when it turns to be the when we look at things in the summary format. So I like using a combination of CSI codes as well as unit format codes, which can be really useful for just organizing building systems. But this is also where we store our cost estimate data, so unit costs, defining what units of measurement we're going to be assigning to different model elements, and so on. So there's a lot of different cost properties here. I'm just going to roll up a few of these, but really that's the first step, is going through and assigning or adding in these properties and making sure that the properties are assigned to the appropriate classifications. So once we've done that, we can then really start looking at the individual cost reports. And so really the process is you import the properties, and then you can just go ahead and you can import all these different cost reports. So let's just pull up that cast in place concrete, and we can quickly show just how we can refresh from our model here right back into Excel. So to get a little more space here, I'm going to roll that one over, and maybe I'll pull this down just so we can see it off to the side. So in this report here, we can see we have a header that's based off a uniformat level 4. So we can see wall foundations, column foundations as we scroll down. Let me freeze that top header. And then we keep going down, we have a few other items here. So some of these, looking at them, probably need to be maybe renamed with an element ID that's a little more accurate. But if we say we grab just these wall foundations, which we can do by highlighting the header and clicking on it to select in 3D, it'll go ahead and select all of those foundations for us. We can isolate those. And maybe if we want to go in and do an update on the cost, I would do a Control-Shift-T, which goes into the edit of the selection set, which allows me to modify both objects and slabs. That's why I'm doing it this way versus going through the info box. But say instead of 300, maybe we want to go to, I don't know, $275 a cubic yard for these wall foundations. So we do the update there. And then to go round trip, it would just be going back to the publisher that we've set up. That's essentially just these same cost reports, just located into the publisher under a cost reports folder. Go here, publish. Now that we've updated that to 275. And so as soon as we come back here to our cost report, all we have to do is just refresh, and we can see all those wall foundations updated our cost. So that's what I really like about this workflow, is it's really quick to work in the model and go back and forth to refresh things. And it gives you a lot of flexibility, breaking down your cost reports into these individual trade packages is how I like looking at them. Because depending on what trade you're looking at, you're going to have very different data associated with those reports. So let's take, for example, like the structural metal framing, which is, again, this is a totally different type of report. We have different values here, such as like the object type in this case. So we're actually pulling into the ArchiCAD attributes to pull some of this out. We're basing this, instead of off cubic yards, we're doing this based off ton. In this case, we're actually not pulling up the W shape for structural, because actually what's interesting about this is actually content. Oop, I need to unfilter that. This is actually content coming through from an IFC import of a Revit model. So what's cool about this is we can still do these estimates based off of, certainly off anything that's native in ArchiCAD. It's always easier in ArchiCAD, but we can also do this based off external design content as well. And so again, in this case, you know, structural columns we have there, structural braces. I could grab all my braces, go in, and maybe I want to update the cost here. Maybe these should be a little higher, maybe 3,500 instead of 3,250. Update those, go back here. It's a lot of elements, so the more elements you have, the longer it'll take, but we can quickly publish that one because it's already loaded. Go back to our estimate, go down, let's find our braces. structural braces. So hit refresh, and there we go. We're now at 3,500. So that's kind of the workflow in a nutshell. Each of these has different criteria. Some can be based just off the CSI codes that we assign, is what I've found to be like the very cleanest, most simplest way. But some other reports might have different um, uh, criteria that we want to set up, such as using building materials, where perhaps we want to go in and pull out of a composite profile or a complex profile. In this case, say insulation pulled out of a wall profile. So that would be another way of going in, as well as combining that up with, say, a CSI code to extract data into these very specific cost reports. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the workflow. There's a ton of these different reports we can look at, but Eric, maybe if there's any questions at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, we do have some questions. I'm going to put on my webcam, and perhaps you can put on yours as well. And Roderick, I see, has arrived. So after we finish this section, Roderick will be ready to go, which is perfect. So I see some questions from Tom Markunis, who I know has been doing some work with, I forget, he might mention a very prominent architecture firm. He's been in Cairo, I think, working on some projects there, but a famous American designer. But he's asking about the size of the model and whether you need lots of processing power to do this. And of course, you showed one, I don't know, 15-story building or whatever it was, and you showed this gymnasium. So talk about the size, relative processing power you need to do data like this, and how it relates to 3D, because my impression is that the data side is actually a little easier for ArchiCAD than just cutting, detailed sections of a very complex model. And then the other thing is, Tracy Stone asks, do you have to manually assign the properties to each element, and how long does that take? So those are a couple of questions you can weave together.
Yeah, so in terms of the size of the model, and I was looking through some files here to see if I could find the original model size. Currently, this file that we're looking at for this gymnasium is just under 300 megabytes, so I wouldn't say that it's a massive model. I know some files can get much larger than that, but I don't think it was much smaller than that. It may be like 10, 15 megabytes, but I don't think it was drastically smaller than that. I'm trying
So
to.
the data didn't add a whole lot of size, the costing data.
No,
Uh,
actually, so the detached PLA was 301 megabytes. So I guess after I, saved a local version, it ended up actually being a little smaller. So I don't know what it was after I saved a local version. It's probably less than 300, but.
So is data particularly an issue in terms of computer horsepower? My impression is that as you do more and more detailed 3D models to get beautiful sections, that's where you potentially, just weigh down the model. You have complex profiles instead of composites, et cetera. And that data would be a much easier thing for ArchiCAD because it's just numbers, right?
Yeah, I with properties, I haven't noticed a big increase in the size. Um, I have, on the other hand, with classifications, if you add a whole new classification set and assign it to all, then I've doubled the size from 150 megabytes to 300 just by adding a new classification and assigning it to everything. But I think that was a rare case. But yeah, the data it doesn't really take a whole lot of, I don't think, any added processing power. If you have enough to navigate your 2D views, I think that's usually what takes the most processing power, even more so than 3D views in my experience. But running the reports doesn't take too long as you set them up smart, where you're not, I try to avoid using IFC data as much as possible because calculating globals and that type of stuff can take a while. But properties are usually pretty quick to process in terms of running reports.
Okay.
Um, and
So Do you have to manually assign the properties to each element? What's the sort of basic strategy for saying, all right, I've got a model, it's pretty cleanly done. Now we need to make sure that everything is able to get cost data.
Yeah, so some of the things I like doing are, and you do have to manually assign stuff. Some of the reports that you wouldn't have to would be those like the ones that are actually pulling out the, excuse me, the materials. So all you would have to do is just align the building material to the whatever the local attributes are, and then this would automatically start running reports just by going in and searching for it.
So it
But
basically will just report how much gypsum board or insulation or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
that type of report is not referencing the codes. Most of these reports are going to be referencing the codes that I've assigned. So in that case, it is a manual process of going through and assigning the correct codes and the cost data to those. You have to assign cost data regardless. That's a manual process applying that to these different categories. But it's really for me, it's a process of reviewing the content of the model, kind of performing QA/QC to make sure that it's modeled accurately. So I'm going to get the anticipated quantities, and as part of doing quality control on the model. So
Okay. So you've developed some very efficient ways to do find and select and be able to make sure that everything is assigned to something and that you can see all the elements that are actually grouped together. I know you can isolate just all the elements that are under a particular category and say, show it to me in 3D, and then you can see, oh yeah, that looks good, or wait a second, there's something here that was in here that shouldn't be. So I know that that's something that you've developed efficient ways to do it. Question, Lewis asked, what level of detail or LOD is the gym project?
I'd probably say this is 300, 350 maybe.
Okay, and for those of you who don't understand that reference term as an actual formal term, as you go up through the levels of detail, you get more and more information visually as well as data. And 100 is a very conceptual. 200, you're getting some more geometry in there. 300, you're starting to get working drawings, I believe, and 350. And then like 400 is where you actually could do a full-size cutout of things if you wanted.
Yep. Eric, one part that I wanted to point out that I didn't cover yet is kind of the difference between conceptual estimating and detailed estimating.
Yes.
Can I take maybe 2 minutes to explain that real
Yes.
quick?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I want to point out here is I'm using 2 zones in this case to represent the gross square footage of this project. So using those 2 zones, I can run a report that actually, again, this is, talking about standardization. Every single line item here aligns exactly with the summary report in the cost estimate. So what I can do here is I can actually assign a gross square footage value to those 2 zones. Say, like in this case, $12 a square foot. Maybe we can get a little tighter. Maybe we go $11 a square foot. And I'll just publish this out real quick while it's running in the back. And so the way that this translates over, we can actually see here, this is a target gross square footage. This is an expression that's adding all these up. And this is actually a cost that's, $5,560. Just taking that value multiplied by the area of that zone. But these can be really, really useful for doing conceptual estimating. And so that gets back to these 2 columns that I pointed out earlier. So one of them I call is a target value estimate. And I'm actually going to clear these out here. And you'll see that as I put a little check mark here on the side, you can see what number I'm using in my total package here. So these target values are really useful for like doing like an early, say 5-minute estimate where you're loading up all the cost with every single line item as applied to your project. And you're able to use these zones as a way of just giving yourself a target for, a target budget for each of these line items as you work through the design. So it's also a way of filling scope gaps in the model where obviously you're not always going to have everything modeled to a fully detailed level in order to produce an estimate. You can tell as I get down here to the MEPs, like I'm using almost, well, in this case, I am using all of the conceptual models numbers here versus the model base coming from the different reports. So what's nice about this, we'll go back up, say, to the concrete example again, is after I've completed an estimate or completed the model, say for cast in place concrete, I can actually pick to choose which one I want to use and carry in my total cost. So this allows you to kind of balance between a conceptual estimate as well, as you progress your design into a very detailed estimate and be able to produce a complete picture to really make sure that you're picking up everything, even if you haven't modeled it yet. So hopefully that helps fill that gap
Okay,
there.
so, there's a bunch of other questions, but I know we should try to finish this up, let's say within the next 5 minutes,
Sure.
because we want to allow enough time for Roderick, who has made it to the building, so to speak. So I'm just going to read them very quickly so you can just weave them along with, we should do at least a brief announcement of our plans working together. But the questions relate to how do you derive properties from a component of a composite, or do you apply cost data some other way? Watch out for nuts and bolts from steel manufacturer IFC, lots of data. So that's obviously a question of how detailed do you need to get to do this. John Chando, can you show one simple object and how to assign the properties? And some questions about when you're outputting to Excel, if you have reinforced concrete, can you get pounds of or kilograms of steel from things like that with the rebar, I guess. Kobe template. So we're not going to be able to answer all of these in detail. Maybe at the end of today's session, after Roderick, we could have John answer some more detailed questions. But
sure. I'll try to do a few real quick ones. So to assign the cost data, say if there's no data assigned to these at all, obviously right now there already is, but you just go through, and I like using my info bar on the left here because it makes it really easy to scroll up and down. But you just go through and you just assign what category it falls under, what location, and the unit cost, you just plug it in right there. The unit cost and specifically the unit. You always have to define a unit before you even define a unit cost. You can't have one without the other. In terms of composites.
Now, before you go on, you just showed how to do it with one, but you would obviously want to find and select all that are similar.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then you do it once and it affects those 10, 20, or 500 elements that are similar. So it's not like you have to go through every item. You just have to go through every type of item.
Yep, exactly. To do a composite. So for example, this wall here has several things associated with it. There's drywall, there's framing, there's backer board, there's tile on the outside. So this is a different scenario where, because this is modeled as a composite and there's several trades packed into one, this is where we go a little bit deeper. You can actually see my unit cost here is 0 because I'm not using this unit cost. What I'm using is, if we roll down here a little further, so under thermal and moisture, I have a insulation type and I have an insulation number based off the square footage there. If I go down, I also have a framing type where I have a metal stud 6-inch and a framing cost per square foot. I go down a little further, the outside finish in this case is tile. I have $7. The outside sheathing type is cement and backer board. And so I have these, what I call like secondary costs that are broken out. I also have things such as paint here, like, is it a painted surface? True. And so it's interior sided paint, $1.50 a square foot. So you can see there's these different cost properties here available to produce those different reports. One thing I'll point out, just there was a question on rebar, is I'd run the report exactly the same as the concrete reports. The only difference is the values that I assign. So in this case, I'm assigning pounds of rebar per unit. So in this case, all these continuous footings have 150 pounds of rebar per cubic yard in this case. I have a cost per pound. And so really using these is how I'm assigning the different cost data. So there's probably some down here like, slab on grade, I'm using 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds per square foot. So that's a different type of uh, rebar calculation. But what's nice is it's flexible where you can modify it, and whatever makes the most sense for that object type, you can do that. Did I answer, I think, a
I
few
think
of those?
that's as much as we should go into the details there. I think let's just talk a little bit about our current upcoming plans, and then we'll be able to introduce Roderick. So you want to talk about this, or shall I?
Sure. So, yeah, Eric, we've been talking for, you know, a while now, and something that we've discussed in the past has been the idea of taking this cost workflow that I've spent a ton of time developing and building out, and taking your template, which obviously is one of the more widely used templates in terms of the ArchiCAD world, and combining these two in a way that can really help the AMT users get this added benefit of being able to use all these preloaded reports, preloaded objects that you have in your Legends file, and being able to deploy this type of, from conceptual to detailed estimating workflow delivered through your master template. So that's the announcement. That's kind of the concept that we've been talking about. And yeah, I'm pleased to announce that, I think we have this, I guess, agreed upon in principle, and yeah, coming out in as early as next month. So I'll let you expand on that if you'd like.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to be able to integrate John's work with Master Template, and I think what it provides when you have a combination pre-built like this is a quick way to develop your models and just have all of that framework preloaded, so you can essentially select from all of those categories and items and just the whole system. You won't have to build it yourself. And I think that this will enable firms of almost any size to at least do basic quantities and cost estimation for simplifying the bid process and managing managing that process and verifying that bids are coming in, in a reasonable scope. We'll be seeing with Roderick how he uses a different system for managing his quantity takeoffs and working with subcontractors, and that'll be an interesting alternative. But I think this one is going to have some extra benefits because it's integrated directly within the model. Now, if you can move up to the class, we're going to be creating a class together. I'm going to be doing some of the introductory and basic foundational training, and John is going to be teaching, certainly all of the specialized stuff related to the cost estimating workflow. And that we're looking at May, June. It's probably weekly series for 6 weeks, 1 to 2 hour long classes. Now it'll apply to people who don't use Master Template as well, because it's going to be more conceptual. But for anyone who does get that combined package, then it'll give you the roadmap for actually implementing using that tool and framework. And I'm really excited because I've gotten so many questions in this, particularly in this last year, with ArchiCAD having introduced more expression-based calculations in formulas in the properties, for people saying, well, can I now get this data? Can I calculate such and such? And there are things you can do directly within ArchiCAD without doing this whole external linkage, but they're fairly limited. And so if you want to go beyond, break through those barriers, then you need a workflow similar to this. And I think John's probably leading the industry in terms of taking ArchiCAD's workflow into this area. And I'm very excited, to be working with John on this. So we'll be announcing pricing for this. We have some things to work out, but I think it'll be very reasonable, very, for anyone who wants to just understand the model better, it'll make a huge difference. And the way I'm going to just take another 45 seconds here to say, if you think about when you drew things on paper or in CAD and you had a 2D model, Now, in your head, you were thinking about the 3D design. You're always thinking about that and how it's going to be built and code and all of that. And you're also thinking about cost and, we need to make sure it fits into budget. Well, you would never give up that 3D feedback that you have in ArchiCAD. All of you who are on this, watching this presentation, you rely on the fact that you can see and look around and modify and get it so that it looks right. In the same way, your costing, if you don't have that feedback, then you're more likely to have the issue where you've got a beautiful design and later on you get a quote from contractor and it's not what you or the client need to see. So if you can get the data while you're working, you can then refine that and do much better value engineering, cost reduction as part of the design process. So I think it's going to really, in the same way that 3D helps the 2D drawings get created better, I think the quantities are going to help the building design get optimized better. So
You'll really help out your contractor and your bidders too. It just speeds up the whole process if you can leverage it. So
yeah, so there's some contact information for John, and I'll send out a follow-up email to everybody who has attended, with John's information as well. Is 3D Constructor and ContraBIM are basically two different ways to get to you?
yeah, 3D Constructor is my company, and then ContraBIM is kind of the brand of the template. So
Right.
I
Okay.
know it's a little confusing. Hopefully not too confusing.
All right. So we're gonna, if you have other questions for John, please feel free to type them in. We're gonna move on to introducing Roderick, and perhaps at the end, if John, if you can stay on, we may be able to, take some additional questions.
Yeah, I'll hang up.
All right. So Roderick, want to put on your webcam?
There we go. Can you hear me
Yeah.
okay?
All right, so I'm going to make you presenter so you can go ahead and share your screen, or you can talk first. All right, great, do both. So I'm going to just give you a tiny extra introduction here. Roderick and I have worked together for a long time. Roderick bought his ArchiCAD through my office and got training years ago and has far surpassed well, I wouldn't say, surpass the teacher, but certainly in all of the stuff that you do, I could never design like that, and I could never run projects like that. But I'm so pleased to see how far you've taken ArchiCAD as a tool for creating beauty in these special locations and really working with clients who just have, the big budgets and discerning, requirements for creating beautiful work. And you've won so many awards and been seen and been presenting in so many places. It's my privilege to, be able to work with you and to share your work with ArchiCAD users.
Well, then thank you for that. Really nice intro. Now I don't have anything else to say. I'm good. Okay, so what do you think we should start? We should start with doing sort of the remake of the Munich presentation first, and then do sort of some of the Bluebeam workflows later, or would you like me to switch it over so that people can have sort of the contrast to John's approach as to something that's different because we just take a different approach, a different point of view?
Well,
maybe that would be more effective.
No, I think actually let's do your BIM presentation because that'll just give a sense of your firm, the type of work you do overall, rather than immediately getting into the the nitty gritty of, well, here's how we do some quantity stuff. So
okay, all right. So let me share my screen, and let me see, how do I get rid of? All right, are you looking at my screen? Okay.
We are looking at the screen, and I'm going to turn off my webcam. You can leave yours on for the whole thing or turn it off anytime. So.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go first to, I'm going to show my iPad screen first. Now, maybe we should just tell people that we notice we have a little bit of a glitch. If sometimes I change to the 3D view, the iPad seems to disconnect. So if that happens, I'll just reconnect immediately. All right, so I'll just put this up on full screen so you're not bothered with the background of the other window. So you're now only looking at my iPad, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So what I'll do here is I'll give sort of a compressed version of the presentation that I did recently at the BIM World in Munich, Germany. I think it was end of November last year, and which was quite interesting. I assumed I was going into an audience which was very elevated, very knowledgeable in BIM, and was surprised to see that it's the same as many other conferences that I give in other cities, let's say within Latin America, and that everybody's still early in the process. So I was quite surprised at that. But anyway, let me just go here. And okay, so one thing I'll point out, and I know that Eric wants me to explain how this is prepared, and I will do it shortly after the presentation, is if you notice, I'm just using BIMX. And this is what's called the presenter view of BIMX. When I was putting together the presentation for the BIM World Munich conference, I was told I was only going to have 20 minutes of time on the podium. I mean, very German, I mean, very, very exact. And they wanted me to do something a little bit different. So whereas all of the other presenters on the conference had their own little PowerPoint slides and everybody was showing PowerPoint stuff back and forth, Graphisoft actually asked me if I could do just something live, just using BIMX. So of course I was thinking about the presentation, and I said, well, I need to give some form of introduction to whatever I'm going to be showing on the presentation. So it came to me that I could just use this new feature, which is the presenter view. And I put together a few slides. So this is, just the main slide, or the title slide. And I did everything within ArchiCAD, published it out, and then using the BIMX application, I created the whole presentation within less than 15 minutes. So that was actually pretty cool. So anyway, I call the presentation BIM There Done That, High-End Luxury Residences in Tropical Paradise. So it was basically just trying to do a live showcase of one of our recent projects, which was one of the examples of the residences that we designed for the Cap Limon Luxury Resort project in the Dominican Republic, which, by the way, we won a few awards for those. So just a little bit of background on our company. So basically, we are a design build company. We focus on mainly high-end luxury residence design in really cool places here in Costa Rica and some other places around in the Caribbean. Now we've broadened our scope, thankfully. We've won a few awards by now. With this recent project in the Dominican Republic, we were very lucky to be awarded with the Best Leisure Architecture award for the entire Caribbean region. So not only did we win the award for the Dominican Republic, we won it for the entire region. So that was pretty cool. We've been featured in lots of publications internationally, both design magazines, some of the world's best books by the International Property Awards. We were featured, I think it was 2 years ago, in the GROI Water Intelligence Enjoyment book, and so forth. So, also very honored by that. And just a few quick examples just to set a little bit of context on the type of project that we do. This is the Cielomar residence, which we completed back in 2012 now. We're currently working on a new project for the same client. So I think it's fair to say that he was happy with the results. Another view of the same house. This is actually the neighbor residence to Cielomar. So this is the Cielavi residence. Also, pretty large residence. And Casa Magallon, which is one of the projects that is closer to our hearts. This was also an award-winning project. It won the Best Residence for Costa Rica 2016 award, also in the International Property Awards. And that's sort of like a nice bird's eye view of the house. So getting into the presentation itself, this is one of the designs that we did for the Cap Limon Luxury Resort project. So we created a total of 6 home models, if you could call them home models, for that resort. And it was a very interesting kind of approach that we did. I mean, we were giving a blank slate of over probably about 700 acres of land that we needed to develop. And so we were involved from the initial master planning of the project, and were hired to do the architectural work for the project as well. So that sort of expanded scope gave us a lot of design liberty, which was really cool. And what we did is that we created different designs that would tailor to the different topography conditions of each of the sites. So we broke down the whole, let's say the whole mountainside, into probably, I would say, about 6 different types or different condition types. And then we designed a project for each one of those condition types. So instead of a project or a resort where the client can come in and just buy a property and then say, oh, I want model A or model B on that property, this was the other way around. So if they wanted this particular site, then there was already a design assigned to that site, or maybe 2 that could fit that sort of condition. So forgive me, I'm going to swipe up the notifications if they pop up, because I need to keep my Wi-Fi turned on so that I can project from my iPad over to my MacBook. Okay, so this is an example of one of the homes. You can see the level of detail that we put in our models. So we try to be very broad and precise, and we try to have an approach where everything comes from the model as much as possible. Now, of course, in this case, you see, I mean, that's same area. We do, of course, use external rendering programs. And in some of those cases, let's say all of this entourage, which looks nicer for the purpose of the renderings, is added only on the rendering program. We don't like to add it straight through into ArchiCAD because it just raises up too much the polygon count. But if you see, the dimensions and the layout is precise. So a couple more views of the inside of this living space of that home. And then if we go to one good example area on our projects is our bathrooms. So we put a lot of detail on our bathroom designs, and we take lots of care of modeling specifically many of the items in the spaces so that they're actually true to life. So if we can't get the actual manufacturer model, we will create it. So in this case, let's say the bathtub, the lavatory sink, the faucets, all of those were either we were able to get it from the manufacturer, or if we didn't, let's say it was available, but maybe in a different format, then we created the object ourselves to make sure that what we're putting into our designs and our plans is true to life and not maybe just an above counter basin sink that may be sort of a representation, but that then may lead to some, I don't know, misinterpretation once the project is under construction and so forth. And one of the reasons that we go to this length or this extent of detail on our work is that because we're doing design build work, so we prefer to go, a lot ahead into the work that we put into our model and the way that things are represented in the model so that everything looks good and precise in BIMX, because we use BIMX as an execution and project management tool for our own construction teams, for ourselves as we do inspection on our site visits and so forth. So, I've basically haven't been lugging around a set of plans on one of our construction sites for, I think now 4 or 5 years. I'm just carrying an iPad all the time. And I have all my projects in my iPad of anything that we are currently working on construction or have worked before in construction. So this is a good example, and note several things in this particular view of this bathroom. And I can just very quickly turn around here on the BIMX. If you notice, even the materials or the surfaces, let's focus on ArchiCAD speak. So the surfaces are actually the exact materials that will be used on those spaces. So that when it comes the time of actually building this, then this can be used as a tool for them to say, okay, yeah, so the darker travertine is supposed to go here, and the other travertine, let's say the small pattern lighter travertine, is supposed to go on the floor, and the one that comes on the square pattern, that's supposed to be for the shower floor only, and maybe the white looking or the white subway tile kind of tile, that's supposed to be for the shower walls. So that they can actually use this for real reference of the finishes and everything that has to go in this space. And additionally to that, even the layout of the tile is precise. So we're actually showing where the tile should start. And we take care of making sure that the patterns that we represent on the surfaces are true to scale as well. So just a cutout view of that same space, which also helps to see a little bit of everything that I was talking about. And here's a view of, let's say, one of our interior drawing sheets, where you basically see the same thing. And as ArchiCAD users, many of you know, hey, this is just live from the model. This is not a drawing. And basically one of the, or the main philosophy that we use here at the office is nobody's allowed to draw anything. So anything that is represented on a set of plans has to be live from the model. And that applies to things such as this light switch. All right, so yes, there will be a 4-gang light switch here, and we've accounted for it. We have enough space here in the wall for a 4-gang plate. And the plug, so this is the exact placement where we want the plug. And that plug is visible both here in the interior elevation, as well as the model itself. And the details for the niche, where the hangers go inside the, or right next to the shower, and so forth. So all of that is actually live and is coming from the model. As we go here, you see, I mean, a good representation of that I was just talking about. And for those of you that are currently using BIMX, you know that this is second nature. For those of you that still aren't using it, my only question would be, why aren't you using it? But here you can see a very quick overlay of the model with the drawing right on top of it, which speaks to exactly what I was referring to, that everything is true to the model itself. Again, some of the additional areas, like I was saying, an example of just that plug on the wall that was shown on the interior elevation, that's actually an object that's put exactly where we want it, so that there's no mistake. And the model itself with that level of detail is what we bring. Once it's complete to that level of detail is what we bring out to our rendering program, so that when we provide a rendering to a client, it's not the kind of thing where you have to put an asterisk down here at the bottom saying, oh, this is an artist rendition only, things could change. Well, no, this is a true rendering, because this shows exactly the size and the design of the cabinets, where the plug is going to be, where the towel hangers are supposed to be, the real size of the shower niches, and the real materials that were actually chosen, and the light fixtures that come already from our lighting design that we did for the project itself. So this is actually a true to life kind of rendering from a very highly developed set of plans. Also, typically our drawing sections are very, very laden with lots of specification and information. In our case, I mean, I've been an avid user for many years of some of the CAD image tools. In this case, you see I use an application of the CAD image Keynote tool, which is the way of how to do those codes and do this sort of layout with all the specifications, which even allows us to have even a live link here to product page of the website of this specific manufacturer and so forth. So we even put that sort of information. This isn't, this is not tappable on the BIMX, but when we publish a set out to a PDF, then if somebody just opens this up on a PDF viewer program, then they will be able to just click on that link. Another good example of level of detail and information that we bring on our project is our door schedules. So we prefer the door schedules to be a little more visual and to have all the necessary information. But you also notice one thing that typically comes across on the way that we approach our program, and let's say our designs and the way that we use ArchiCAD, which is an important use of color. And I've been an avid advocate of this for some years. I remember this was probably one of the topics of one presentation I did some years back on the Masters of ArchiCAD program from Eric, which was my application of color for using BIMX. And it's just shown us that it enhances the readability of many things, and it enhances the clarity of the person reading the set of plans. It just makes it easier for them. They sort of get used to it. And for us, it's just sort of second nature. Then anything that's information we put in blue, anything that dimension will be shown in green, and so forth. So this kind of thing, even on a schedule like this, still comes through. Also, of course, these are normal 2D drawings, but even these, we reference back to our door schedule. So this is also a good example of some of the level of detail, level of information that we bring to our projects. Another view here of another section, and this one is interesting so that you can reference, let's say, on a detail such as the railing, which you'll see has a detailed drawing here, and of course then that gets associated to the actual detailed drawing of the railing, and that we can still reference back and know that that railing is true to life and it comes from the model itself. It's just not simply a drawing that was plopped in maybe from a manufacturer. And we have, sometimes there's this disconnect between what you're showing on the 3D and then some different information that's coming from the manufacturer data. We're always very careful to make sure that one thing lines up with the other, so that we can tell our construction teams that whatever they're looking at on BIMX, they can trust it. And that if they're looking at this railing, they can trust that they can know that the railing design will be a square post, will have a pyramidal base down here at the bottom, will have a little connector on the top to support the rail, the top handrail, and the number of bars that is shown here, that'll be the number of bars, and they'll all be supported by the little the connector pegs. So we make that extra effort to put this level of detail on the modeling itself so that the construction guys can learn to trust it, and that then they're not asking questions all the time, or they're not assuming things all the time. Now, as we move along, and you can see just the different applications of different views that we can provide the teams, let's say from a more general floor plan like this to a more refined and more detailed with lots more information on a dimension plan like this, or a color-coded ceiling plan such as this, which is very, very simply, this is done by doing graphic overrides and then applying different color graphic overrides to the different composites that are used to model these ceilings. So in this case, the gray ones may be the cement-based board, the light blue ones may be regular sheetrock, the orange-colored ones may represent wood ceiling, and the green ones is probably representing mold-tough sheeting board. So this just makes it far easier for the construction teams to understand what needs to go where, as opposed to, let's say, imagine if this was just simply a black and white, and they have to go in here and read a code and say, oh, this is MDT, and then go to the legend and figure out that MDT is whatever type of just sheetrock. So applying color everywhere that we can just eases the understanding and makes the speed of understanding the project by the construction teams a lot quicker. And of course, they can trust that the data that's shown on some of our schedules, which we actually put into the plans itself, is also trustworthy. So in this case, this is just a schedule that's associated to that reflected ceiling plan that I was showing. which then tells them, all right, so we have a total of Duroc cement board ceiling of 101 square meters, and the regular sheetrock ceilings are 425 square meters, and so forth. So same kind of thing on some of our other drawings, and you can see I'm just sort of perusing through some of the different views that we put on our construction drawing set, and you can very easily see the different application of model view options, graphic overrides, and so forth, to just convey different information. You can see how, I mean, everything's from the same live model, but you can see how in this case, it's a finish plan, or let's say a floor finish plan and wall finishes plan, because we also typically use these tags, which are smart tags. These are actually calling out the surfaces that go on each surface of that particular wall. And that, of course, is associated to a legend that says whatever PIN01 or PIN02, each one of those actually mean. But then what we do is that for us, let's say our normal workflow may be that for us, ENC01, during the course of the project, that may be called exterior stone or exterior stone cladding. And PIN01 may mean interior white paint. But then at the end of the workflow, we changed each one of those surface names into this coding, so that when we use this schedule and tell it to report automatically, then instead of saying here a really long, cumbersome name that is convenient for us to understand during maybe 5 months of the project, that at the end it can just be converted very quickly into a code, which is what the guys on site are used to read. Again, this is just the schedule showing some of the data of that flooring sheet or finishes sheet, which tells them what each of those flooring types are supposed to be, some of the specifications, and all of this in a similar fashion to how John was explaining, and let's say his approach for costing. All of this stuff is information and data that has been plugged into properties. So we also use lots of or do a heavy use of the properties feature for this type of application, and just pulling data out of the model and just to include it into our drawings. In a similar way, in our interior drawings, we also like to provide these schedules, which are a little more visual, let's say, of some of the equipment that has to go into each one of those spaces. So we'll prepare one of these schedules, and the filter for this is pretty simple. It'll just say, hey, if this is zone number 124, then just list all of the objects that are inside zone 124. And then all of this data down here is punched into the properties, saying, all right, so what's the category, what's the type of element, what's the brand, the model, the part number, the finish, and so forth. So that also there's lots of clarity in the sense of when they're looking at some of these interior drawings, there's lots of clarity of the actual objects or elements that were purchased for the project and needs to go into each one of these spaces. So I think this is, probably a quick rundown of some of the stuff that I presented at the BIM World. So I don't know if anybody has some specific questions for this part of the presentation before we jump into the Bluebeam part.
Hey, Roderick. So beautiful work as always, and very clear presentation. There's a question from Scott saying, actually, two questions. Joe asks, what objects are you using for your electrical devices? So I guess that would be 3D and 2D, objects that you put in. So that would be one question, simple.
Yeah, they're both 3D and 2D. If I go here and let me just come out of my presentation mode and just very quickly show, let's say, our reflected ceiling plans. And so we do two types of reflected ceiling plans. We'll do a ceiling type plan, which is this, which I showed briefly. And we also, That way, that little thing gets out. And we also do our lighting design plans, which is not an electrical plan. This is where and how we represent our lighting design in the sense of where each light fixture needs to go and the type of light fixture. So what these are actually 2D objects that I created, and they're very simple objects. They're basically just, I don't know, line work with a text element associated to the object. So that this text, you can just punch in information, and then we create a lighting schedule, which is very, very simply pulling information out. So all of the fixtures labeled A, that represents, okay, so the light fixtures code A are a LED C4 fixture, it's a multi-tier EVOS, and all the information associated to that. So these are very, very basic 2D objects, which just have the necessary containers to punch information into them, which are basically properties, just property data, so that a table like this can be very easily created.
Now, you're also representing them in 3D. Are those objects that you're placing in this view appearing in 3D, or are you using separate elements for the 3D representation?
In the specific case of the lighting fixtures on let's say, on our lighting design plans, these are not represented in 3D. However, all of the light switches, for example, let's say right here in the center, see this object. This is, and the way that we prepared these sheets are also using a CAD image tool. So this is, in this case, is the CAD image electrical tool. So this object is part of the CAD image electrical library, which provides this 2D representation, and at the same time is modeling a 2D gang plate with the 2 dimmers inside them. So that's how we come up with that 3D content that I was showing before.
So that 3D would include the light, receptacles as well as switches, but you're not actually, what happens with the lighting when we want to, if you're looking at the interior of the room and you want to see the ceiling lights or suspended lights?
I choose not to show them because depending on our lighting design, let's say the number of different fixtures that we may choose to include on one project or another, can be very broad, and the manufacturers change these light fixtures now very, very, very quickly. So it would be too much of an effort to actually model these elements in a true to life form, like we choose to do with, for example, the plumbing fixtures.
I see. Okay. So, and that hasn't been an issue in terms of coordination. Basically, you're specifying the fixture, you're indicating its location, and it doesn't need to be seen in the rendering or the interior elevations?
Correct. In the cases where we want to show them in a particular rendering, for example, some of these ones that I was showing here. So, for example, here you do see a light fixture on the ceiling. So these were added in the rendering program on the specific locations that we already designed for them in the lighting design. So we do put a little bit of extra work on the rendering program specifically for the lighting, but then we only do it for 1 or 2 rooms wherever we choose to do the renderings.
Okay. So just as a general note, you said that you use CAD image electrical, and I know you use CAD image keynotes. So a general question is, why do you use these third-party add-ons? What benefits do you get from investing in their tools?
Well, one is very simple. Let's say if I go here to just this section as an example, you can very quickly see the number of codes that I have in that one section drawing. And imagine that I wanted to convey that amount of information in normal text-based labels. I would very quickly run out of room. So what would happen is that then those labels would be sort of very short-based or very just very generic in many ways, or in some other ways I would end up choosing to not specify some things that maybe I would feel otherwise that I should specify. In this case, I feel safer, let's say from a liability standpoint, just make sure that we have all of the necessary specifications and notes and so forth, so that we're covered, let's say, even from a legal standpoint on the work that and the level of specification that we do on our projects. And the reason why is that by doing this and having this schedule be automatically generated by the tool, then, hey, I can make sure that I'm correctly specifying with the level of detail that I want the actual explanation of, let's say, a post-tension slab, or the kind of insulation that's supposed to go here. Now, there is an advantage, let's say, or a disadvantage that we have, because I mean, we're doing projects in Costa Rica. Our specification is in Spanish, of course. Spanish, as opposed to English, is tremendously cumbersome. There's no real way to specify in a short manner many things in the way that you can do it in English. So in English, you might just put in insul R15, and everybody's going to understand that that's R15 batt insulation. In Spanish, you end up doing like a whole sentence to do the same thing. So it's kind of ridiculous that way. So this is a good way for me to work around that, let's say, language barrier, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So one other thing I'll point out about that particular reporting is it's very straightforward in the Keynote tool to say, I only want, this report should only report the drawings that are on this sheet. So you have those two sections on that sheet. Whatever elements are called out in those two sections will be listed, and things that are in other parts of the project will not be seen. So it can be very specific, whether it's short or long, but you're not having stuff that, you know, people might be looking at saying, well, where is this reference? No, it's not on this sheet, you know. So that's a powerful part of it.
And I'll just very quickly mention, and going back to, let's say, this drawing as a quick example, remember that I mentioned my application of color. This is a good way to see why I use this approach. And you can quickly see how you learn in 2 seconds, you learn how to read a drawing like this, where you can easily understand that, hey, all of these red lines, vertical red lines, hey, these are just grid elements. And the purple ones coming across are the actual levels of the project. In this case, our stories, our ArchiCAD stories. Anything that's blue is a specification, anything that's green is a dimension. And then anything else that's not one of those 4 colors is an actual building element. So that's pretty much my compressed explanation of my application of color.
Excellent. So I'm sure there's some other questions. I guess do one more before we transition to the quantity communication and calculation in Bluebeam using the ArchiCAD model. Roger Schaefer says, can you show the plan view sheet with the 3D views again? So just, I guess, so we are in BIMX, and so BIMX is combining the actual layouts, either the entire set or just some subset that you decide are going to be included in the BIMX file, because you don't have to have, you know, you might have 100 sheets and you might put in 25 sheets in, you know, for this type of communication.
I think it probably must have been maybe this one. Well, it actually went back. Let me see. It must have been this, or maybe the section one that I was showing.
Roger says it was a bathroom interior. And
Okay.
I think you were talking about, hey, you know, these fixtures or the outlets are actually, and light switches.
So yeah, that is probably that one.
Mm-hmm. And so Scott asked, he mentioned BIMX Presenter. Is this an extra purchased from Graphisoft? So BIMX Presenter is part of the BIMX Pro tool set. So you get BIMX for free with ArchiCAD, and then you can upgrade it. I think, what is it, like $75 or something like that to get a license to do more things with BIMX. Is that right, Roderick?
That's basically it. And I know that Graphisoft has changed a little bit their pricing structure through years. At one point it was $49. Now I think it's a little more, but you know, it's still very, very reasonable for the kind of power that you get on an application like this. Which in my case, for example, I use BIMX for pretty much everything that you can think of. I use it for client presentation during the course of the project. I use it for my site visits once we have a project that is under construction. I even use BIMX for doing plans review. When let's say we're working on a set of plans and we're not completed on a project yet, we may be 70% done. So I'll tell the guys, all right, just publish a set of drawings and then send me the BIMX. And I'll maybe sit at home and I'll be at my couch at home and just have my iPad and I'll just be flipping through the drawings. Or sometimes even my workflow for doing for using the marker tool to issue corrections for the team, I'll be using BIMX, looking at the drawings, which the speed and ease of operation of reviewing a set of plans in BIMX is a lot easier just because of how fast it is. And I'll have ArchiCAD open right next to me on my computer, and then I'll be punching in some of these the corrections and sending them out to the team through the teamwork. Now, one thing
so you'll go to the ArchiCAD file and do some markup for your team to take care of?
Yeah, exactly. But I'll be doing the review in BIMX just because I'll do it much quicker.
And so is your markup using the markup tools where you can literally put some annotation on and then assign it to a team member?
Exactly.
Okay, excellent. All right.
Yeah. Now, one thing I know we wanted to show as well was the process of how to use the presenter tool. Mm-hmm. And I'll just just take 5 minutes and show this real quick. I'll use another project that I have here that I just loaded up so that I don't have anything set up on that one. Let me see. I got lost within my projects. Should be somewhere down here. Okay, here it is. So this is a simple project that we just recently completed. Nope, there we go, it disconnected. Okay, are we back up again?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the workflow of this is very, very simple. The way you do it is you use this little bookmark icon up here. So I'm going to tap on that, and that opens up a panel that now gives you 3 choices. So you have your favorites, where you can set up the favorites to use the presenter tool. You can have your gallery items. And the way that gallery items are set up is that these are cameras. If you see it says 1 camera. Within my ArchiCAD model, if I set up 10 different cameras, they're going to show up here as just sort of preset views. And this used to be the way that I would do a presentation to a client. I would previously, within my ArchiCAD model, I would set up the different cameras in the different locations throughout the project. And then I would be tapping between one camera view to the next. Now with the presenter tool, I don't need to do that. So the way to do it is super easy. You can see here there's a little plus sign. So let's say that this particular view that I have here, I'm just going to close this up. I can adjust it. Let's say I can adjust the angle of it. And I say, okay, that looks about fine. So I'll tap on the book. I just tapped on the bookmark icon. Now I'm going to tap on this plus sign. And I'll just call this rear view. Click save. And I have a first, let's say, favorite saved. Then I can just turn it in another direction, tap again on the plus sign, and call this angled rear view. And then I'll say, okay, you know what? Let's go to a floor plan. And I want to show the client just the general floor plan as I'm explaining this. So I can just set this up like so. Tap again on the bookmark, tap again on the plus sign and call this floor plan. And then I can say, hey, I want to show maybe a 3D version of this floor plan. So I just tapped on the 3D icon that was down here in the bottom left. Maybe I'll just turn it like so. And I'm just sort of setting this up really quick. Go back to the bookmark, tap the plus sign again, and just say 3D floor plan view. And I'm doing all of this on my iPad, and so no work on ArchiCAD at this moment. And then let's say that I want to go to a section. I don't know, any section will do. And I can just zoom into this particular drawing and repeat the process. Tap the plus sign again and say this is section A. And then maybe I wanted to show a 3D version of this, so I'm going to tap this 3D icon here at the bottom. So BIMX will show me the overlay of it with the model behind it. I'll set it up like so, repeat the process again, and then say 3D section A. Right, so that should be good enough for the purpose of the explanation. And then when you sit down, let's say with the client or whoever you're presenting this to, the only thing you need to do is tap on this icon here, which is the presenter icon. So tap on that, and it'll take you to the very first slide. So now this is basically imagined as a PowerPoint presentation. So you have, if you notice on the screen, I have an arrow here on the right, an arrow on the left. So this just flips between the slides. And I have a play icon here at the bottom. So I can either just say play, and it'll go from one to the next. And I believe it waits, yeah, it waits a few seconds, and then it automatically changes to the next slide, waits a few seconds again, and goes to the next one. Or I could just tap on the screen and manually flip from one to the next to the next. So it's a really cool tool for the purposes of ease of presentation and very powerful at the same time.
That's great. I'm glad you showed that, Roderick, because it is so straightforward to do it once you realize where these, well, first of all, that it's possible, and secondly, just a couple of things like hit this plus sign, etc. The other thing I'll point out, just very briefly, is Roderick was showing me this a couple of days ago, and I was saying, well, where are you tapping? And he said, oh, you know, on the plus sign. I said, oh, well, we couldn't see that he was moving anything like a cursor over to the plus sign. There was nothing that highlighted it. And so what we worked out, and Roderick was doing, you know, without mentioning it, is on his computer screen where this is being relayed, he, for purposes of training and showing you, he's moving his mouse to where the area is on the iPad screen is, and then separately putting his finger on the iPad screen to tap it. So normally you would just be tapping and you wouldn't see anything relayed like where is his finger, and it doesn't like blink to show that you tapped a button, it just does the action. So, all right, let's take a look at your estimating workflow with Bluebeam, because it's definitely a different approach that really works effectively for you.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm still showing my screen. All right. So I'm just gonna tap back here. So this is one of our other projects, and let's say this is an example of a finished approach or finished work of the approach of how we use Bluebeam for some of our, I would say, mainly our quantity takeoffs, and of course, estimating, which is associated to quantity takeoffs. And the reason why I prefer to use this particular approach is very simple. So because we're doing design build, then we're handling contract management for our clients as part of the work that we provide for them. Now, as part of handling contract management, we're constantly dealing with lots of different subs for different trades. So in this particular example that I have here in front of me, let's say this is a reflected ceiling plan showing the different types of ceilings that are supposed to go on that particular section of the project. So let's assume real quick that I need to hire the sheetrock contractor, and I need to tell him what type of ceiling goes where. Okay, so yes, you could say that some of that information already is part of our plans because, like I showed, we're doing color coding straight from ArchiCAD by using the graphic overrides. But additionally to that, then we're using the Bluebeam tool to do the quantification, have data associated to the quantification and the takeoff themselves, and at the same time, then have this be part of the actual contract that we signed with each and every sub. So I'll really quickly show you how. Or first I'll show you, the way that we apply it, and then I'll show you a quick example of how things are done. Just maybe a 5-minute explanation. So if you see, if I just click on this markup, so we call these different ones markups. So this, you see the little yellow points on the vertexes. So this is one markup, and this has lots of data associated to it. What I have here behind is just a PDF file. So we do a publisher set from ArchiCAD. We export our entire set of drawings out to PDF, and then within the PDF, the only thing you need, let's say, one dimension somewhere or one reference point that let's say from this corner to this corner measures exactly how much. You calibrate the drawing so that you're telling the program what exact dimension is from point A to point B, and then everything else gets calibrated immediately. In the specific case that you have, let's say, different drawings at different scales, then you can do viewports in a similar way to how viewports were handled back in AutoCAD, years and years ago, or at least years ago when I used to work in AutoCAD. Then in a similar way, you can assign viewports and say, hey, viewport 1 is at 150 scale, viewport 2 is at 120, and so forth. So that every markup that you do is true to life size. So if you see, it has data associated to it. If I click on it, it highlights it down here at the bottom, and it's telling me that this is a Durock ceiling. And at the same time, it tells me that Roxana was the one that created this markup, and that it has a total length of 41.05. So this is the perimeter length of this particular one. Since this is an area markup, then the length may not be that relevant, but then the area becomes relevant. So this is 37.98 square meters. And I assign a 1% wastage, for this particular trade. And then I have a custom column, which I created, where I created a formula that basically grabs the area and then adds the 1% and gives me the total area plus the wastage. So you can pretty straightforwardly create these custom columns to just estimate things like flooring, painting, whatever you can apply it to. So the main reason why that I use this is, not just because it's easy to do. I just clicked on something that I shouldn't have, but it has lots of data associated to it. And the most important thing is that it allows me to create graphical reports that then I can associate to a contract with a sub. So I'll just show you a very quick example of that. So let's say the data is basically grouped. If I click on this minus sign, you'll see, oops, sorry, let me do this differently. Okay, if I click on the minus sign, I'll just make this panel bigger. You can see that I have lots of different data names here. How this is done is basically that you see this particular one has 2 markups, or if I go to, I don't know, a ceiling type, the Durock ceilings, then in this case, you see I have a bunch of them. And I can go just click on them, click on it, and just using my down cursor on my keyboard, I can just flip from one to the next to the next. So I can do a very quick review and just say, hey, yeah, all of this is correct. So this is just a very simple way for me to assign work to somebody else here at the office, tell them to do all the markups, and then I'll do a review and make sure that everything is correct. But then at the same time, the reporting that I mentioned for the contracts is very powerful. So let's say I'm just gonna, order this.
Roderick?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you just turn off your webcam? Then it will actually make it easier for people to see this when it enlarges. You just turned off your screen sharing.
Yeah. Wrong button.
There we go. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So if I just very quickly tell it to order the data differently, and the only thing I did is that I just click on this on the title here on the top, I can filter information. So I can just say, okay, so give me a filter of, I'll just do a custom filter, and just by subject name, I'll say I want the subject to equal probably Cielos Duroc, or equals, I'm gonna say Cielos de Madera, so in this case it's the wood ceilings, or equals, I'm just gonna do a third one, regular sheetrock ceilings. Okay, so I'll just filter data out by doing it that way. And if you see, nothing was really turned off. You can see some of the other stuff was just simply turned to gray. So it's not only doing a graphical filter, but it's doing a data filter. So now on my data set here, you can see I don't have, that loads of information that I used to have before, which was a really long list. Now I only have 3 items on my list. So once I filter data this way, then I can use a feature which is so cool, which is this summary. So I'll just create very quickly here a PDF summary, and I'll tell it, all right, to browse through all of the pages in this document, which are 19 pages. I will have it exclude all the filtered markups and exclude the hidden columns. So maybe my file has lots of more columns, but those are also hidden so that they're also not taken into account on the report that I'm about to create. I'll tell it to include totals and include the page content. This is the big key. So that, and you'll see in a minute what it does. And I'll just give this a title. I'll just say ceiling summary example. I want to do the flow style because I just like it better. I want my preview to be large. Page size, it can be a letter size page, and I like it to be reported in landscape fashion. I'll just click OK. It'll take a couple minutes to generate the PDF summary. So let's just give it a little bit of time, and I'll show you in a minute. It actually seems slower, but all of a sudden it speeds up and finishes up real quick.
So the use of this summary, can you just, while we're waiting for it, who do you give it to and what is it used for?
So basically, okay, here's the summary. So we give this to our subs, and we prefer, through the years I've learned that I am more efficient with my time and my staff's time if instead of just sending a set of drawings to a sub and say, give me your quote for doing all the sheetrock work on this house, I'll send them the drawings as a reference, but I'll send them the PDF summary, which tells them the specific trade or the specific task that they need to do on each, the different areas, and it shows them the actual area on the floor plan. I'll complement this with the actual full set of plans, or the actual plan, let's say, showing where all this information came from, so that they know that each one of these things that they see on the list actually came from the drawing. So for us, it's much more efficient this way, instead of just saying, hey, here's the drawings, you quote the job. And then once we're, let's say, two things can happen. One could be at the quoting time, then I'll have 3 different quotes from three different guys, and each of them has different dimensions and different quantities. Then I'll have to be measuring things myself, figuring out who is right and who is wrong, and going back to the other one saying, hey, your areas are wrong. So if I have to do the measuring myself anyway, just to confirm who's right and who's wrong, I'll just rather do it outright up front myself. Of course, this is part of the work that we bill our clients to do. And then we have one only source of data for the quotes. So then the quotes can be different because the prices are different, but then that's the whole idea of why getting 3 sets of quotes. Because locally, let's say we have a disadvantage that I'm not sure if in the States it's a little different. Hopefully it might be. Maybe somebody may tell me that it's not. In that a sub may say, if I give him a set of drawings and I tell him, go ahead and quote this job, then let's say he was the least expensive option. Let's say I hire him. Then we're halfway under the job and he starts coming up with extras and he says, oh, that wasn't in the quote. I say, well, it was in the drawings. Yeah, but I didn't take it into account because I didn't understand it. So it wasn't in the quote. And now I have to do it because I have to do it. You're telling me that I have to do it, so I have to charge you for it because it wasn't in the quote. And that's completely normal down here. So this is my way to fight against that, to have one set of consistent information. So then this summary that is now quickly generated, if you see, it clipped a little section of the floor plan where that markup was located. It's telling me that it's 185 square meters, and it's tallying up the total. In this case, this is the only markup for wood ceiling, so it's telling me that it's 185 square meters in total. But in this other case, it's telling me that with the Durock ceilings, I have 19 elements of Durock ceilings, so it's clipping a section of the floor plan on each one of those. And if you notice, it's only showing this particular markup, not showing the one right next to it, which is listed right here on the next markup. And this is telling me that, okay, so this is 9.88 square meters, but it's tallying up everything, and it's telling me that in total it's 363 square meters. So this summary, which is a multi-page document like you see here, then this we attach to the actual contracts that we sign with the subs. So this way they are contractually tied up that this is the scope of work that they were told to do. And then this allows me to very easily, I would say, get away from the fight or even eliminate the potential fight of that potential discussion of the extras, and then what really is an extra and what is not an extra on the job itself. So this is one approach, or this is my approach, I would say. So how to get to this, or the workflow of how to get to this, I'll just show it real quick here. The stapler is actually a tool that's part of the Bluebeam program. And right here on my right, I have a list of PDF files for a particular project. So I'll just select here. Oops, I forget I'm in Windows. So I'll just select here some of these sheets. Let's say I'll include a couple of elevations just for the sake of example. And let's say that these are the sheets that I want to include in a set of one PDF file that I'm going to use for the quantity takeoffs. So I'll just drag this over here. Very quickly, a window pops up and it says, okay, so I just want one output file. And I want to put that, let's put that on the desktop right here, just to make it easier. And we'll call this training example. Click OK, and just click on the staple. Right? And that quickly, it created this one PDF file, which I guess was automatically opened in, yeah, this is Adobe PDF. Let me just get rid of that. So here's the training example. So let me open this up inside Bluebeam. And here's the file. So these are the sheets that I selected. So it created very quickly one PDF file containing all of those drawing sheets. Now, in order to do a markup, the very basic thing that I need to do is just calibrate the drawing. So if you can see here, I have one dimension that tells me that from grid 1 to grid 2, it's 7 meters 48. So I'll just go here, tell it to store the scale in the page, and I need a little more position, calibrate the drawing, and and if you notice, it will identify vertexes. Because a PDF file is actually a vertex, oh, I forgot the term. It's a vector format. So it's actually identifying lines and intersections. So I'll just tell that between these two intersections, I have 7.48 meters. And once I do that, then it'll know, let me get rid of this, then I can just do a test dimension right here inside Bluebeam and make sure that that dimension is right. So I just confirm that. And if I need to make sure, I just add 2 decimals for it, so it's 7.48. So from this point forward, any measurement that I will do inside Bluebeam will be precise. So let's say that, I don't know, let's say that I want to measure out some of these floor areas as a quick example. So I can very quickly just create an area takeoff, and I can just start marking out my intersections here real quick. And let's say that from here to here to here. Double click on that, and I just finished one markup. Then I'll select it, and I'll configure that particular markup. So then I can say, okay, instead of my area measurement, I call that polished concrete, because that's the finish of that particular floor of the house. And I'm going to give it, I don't know, a yellow color, and I'll give it a lower opacity so that I can see through the markup, and I can actually see the drawing behind it. I can do, I don't know, a color so that the border isn't red, which is kind of weird. If I'm bothered, sometimes if I have lots of markups, then these areas are a little bit bothersome, so I'll turn that off. And I can, punch in some additional data in here as well. So I can say, I can give this a layer, I call this flooring, and I can give it a percentage of waste. So let's say I'll give it a 5%. Oops. A 5%, not a negative 5%. So right here, it's telling me already a result. So it's telling me that the area plus the 5% wastage is 59.5 square meters. And if we notice down here, it's already started to tabulate this. And it tells me that the original area is 56.67, but the area plus the wastage is 59.5. And now that I have this set up, and I think I clicked on something that I shouldn't. There we go. Now that I have this set up, then down here I have this button that says add to my tools. So I'll just say, okay, go ahead and just add it to my tools. Or I can just create tool sets if I want. But just for being quick. So this is now the tool that I just created. And once I do that, then I can start creating very quickly more markups with all of that set of information. And if you see, I created the second one and already have the second one tabulated down here. If I have a square area, I can just do very quickly a square like so. And if I have a irregular shape, if you notice, it's very convenient that it drags the drawing down as I need to click on different points. So I don't have to prepare my zoom to be able to do the markup that I want. And now let's say that I want a different one. So I can just say, okay, it doesn't matter. I can use the same one that I just programmed. And let's say that this particular one is something different. So I'll just grab it and say, okay, so this one, I'm going to give it a fill opacity of 40%. And this one will be bathroom tile. And it's not going to be yellow. It's going to be light blue. And that's it. And just by doing that, down here, it created a different information set. So now I have these 3 markups, which are the polished concrete, and another markup, which is the bathroom tile. And if I grab this, and down here say, okay, add to my tools. Just added it up here. And now, oops, there we go. And now I have the pre-programmed markup that I can go to my next bathroom and say, all right, so do that. And now I have a second markup for the bathroom tile. So you see how quickly I'm sort of going through this and starting to do markups of different sets of information. Now, in the case that we have, you might be thinking, okay, this is great for anything that's horizontal. So, I mean, your flooring, your ceiling, and so forth. So anything that's vertical, it's just as easy. You can just go here, instead of an area markup, just do a perimeter markup. So let's say that we have bathroom tile also on the walls. So I'll just click on these vertexes. Now click on this, which it now called perimeter measurement. Then I'll just go here and call this also bathroom tile. So now it'll be grouped within the same set of information, but we will know that we are actually looking for different data from it. We're not looking at the horizontal area, we're looking at a vertical area. So that's where these custom columns come in, where I created some formulas. So if I give it a height, let's say that this is 2.5 meters high, then you'll notice that this data actually changes. Now these other ones, which were the flooring ones, this should actually be 0 height, so that it's not providing false information. And with the one that's the actual vertical one, then in that case, it is reporting information. So if I need to figure out what's the total amount of tile that I need to buy for this bathroom, assuming that it's all tiled with the exact same thing, then I just add this 18.44, which is the one including the wastage, plus the one on the wall area, and that's it. And I also have, I still have a graphical representation of that. Normally, I will do these lines a little bit thicker and lower the opacity of the line so I can still see the drawing right through it. And the reason why I like to do the lines a little thicker is that so when you're zoomed out, you can actually make out many of these vertical takeoff data that you're doing on a horizontal plan. And this is far quicker than trying to go to a section or an elevation and try to measure stuff out from there. So this is, pretty much a quick rundown of my approach and my workflow on this.
So, Roderick, in certain cases, would you do a takeoff from an interior elevation?
In certain cases, yes. Let's say if I go here, let me go through one of my previous files. Let's see. No, not. I think over here in the interiors. Yeah, open a read only, don't worry. So in some cases, yes, I might go to an interior elevation in case that, let's say, on one particular area of a bathroom, let's say this is probably not a good example because it doesn't show different tiles. Yeah, neither does this. But anyway, let's assume that in one particular bathroom, I may have 2 or 3 different types of tile, or even if just a pattern or so forth, and I want to measure them out independently. Then in those cases, I may go to the interior elevations drawing and then do area markups from the actual elevations. So that'll be a different approach in those cases. But I'll just play it depending on what I want to show. And sometimes what I'll do is that even these sheets that now have been marked up with colors for purpose of color coding, then we will send this to the foreman on site so that he knows that the yellow is, I don't know, tile type 1 and the blue is tile type 2 and so forth. And he has a visual reference of what type of tile needs to go installed where.
Okay, that's, I think, very clear how you can combine information from different views. What about one of the things that John clearly has got set up in the contra-BIM template would be elements, like beams and structural stuff that you're not going to be seeing. Well, you're going to be seeing in certain sections and things like that, but counting them up, do you focus on those as well, or has that not been a particular issue in terms of working with subs?
We do, and we do it. Let me see if I can find the structural one. Yeah, this probably should work. I'm just sort of opening up examples of recent work that we've done. Yeah, so this is a good example. This is the structural drawing from our structural engineer. So I think he does this in Revit and just provides us the PDF file of the finished product. So from here, we'll grab his coding and say, okay, this is a retaining wall coded MR1. So in a similar approach, you notice that I marked all of these up in pink, and then the retaining walls MR3 I labeled in yellow, and then this other markup is called, so this one is actually the retaining wall, and the pink one is, wait, oh no, sorry, so this is the beam above the retaining wall, and this is the retaining wall itself. So I'll use this same sort of approach to mark up and quantify the structural items. So I'll do it for footing, I'll do it for, I don't know, slab types. So whatever applies, then we'll just do it the same way. And the one thing that I like about this is the visual component, because we like to say that we like to try to prepare information so that it's idiot-proof. So by doing the quantification and takeoffs like this, not only are we allowing ourselves to be precise and doing the quantity takeoffs, but then this colored set of drawings, we can just issue to the foreman on site and explain the color coding and say, all right, so remember the footing for all of these different retaining wall types? So I can identify if it were the case. For example, actually here, you can notice that the pink ones are different than the yellow one, and then the yellow one is different than the green one. So if I didn't do this, in this specific case, let's say this one, this footing, and this footing are the same width. So maybe the guy will say, oh, it's the same footing, and he'll build it the same way. But it had some difference. Maybe it had a little bit more reinforcement. Maybe it had a little bit less. Maybe it had a detail of how the reinforcement needed to be laid out. And that's why this is MR4 and MR4A. So by using that color coding, I'm sort of idiot-proofing the process and making sure that I'm providing an easy way for the construction team on site to make sure that they're building things the right way.
All right. I think we're at a good place to finish up the presentation side and answer a few questions. And I'd like to invite John back on the line. I'm just going to put back on my webcam. We can all do that here. So I want to thank both of you for really an amazing, eye-opening presentation or set of presentations. I think we're all so comfortable, everyone who's watching this call, with ArchiCAD up to a certain level. And then there are people like both of you who push the limits of ArchiCAD, who really take the information that's in the model or that can be put in the model and leverage it in ways that, I think people can maybe imagine and fantasize about, but like, how do you actually do that practically? And I think both of you have given some real concrete demonstrations and sort of explanations of the practicality of just taking it much further. So that being said, there are a few specific questions that have come in, and I want to just ask a general thing, which is, for where do you see the relative benefits of doing it with the 2D workflow with Bluebeam, because this is all clearly export 2D drawings and then mark them up versus the 3D. What are the relative pros and cons? Because clearly they both work for different, end results.
I
So
I think clearly they both work. So John's approach probably is more precise than mine. It'll be more perfect, but I think that the differences in the quantification, depending on the type of project, may be acceptable. On a larger scale project, like some of the examples that John was showing, maybe at that scale, John's approach is preferred because it's more precise. Now, my approach to the type of project that I do, I like my approach because it has that graphical component attached to it, which helps me provide clear information to the construction team, and it helps me tie up contractually some of the subs to the things that they are supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do, as opposed to if I were to just provide a table or a schedule to them, then it leaves the door open for them to say, how do I know that this room was included in this schedule? And how do I know that this ceiling here was included and already accounted for? So they're going to start telling me, no, your areas are wrong, and I think we have done more. And then that discussion leads to, let's go and measure things on site. And that's a nightmare, because that's one place that I don't want to go there. I don't want to be spending 6 hours walking through a job site with a sub, with a tape measure, breaking up the areas and rooms into squares and rectangles and just noting everything on a notepad. I mean, that's just, take me to hell, please. So my approach clearly protects me from that sort of thing happening. I guess it also depends on the level of professionalism or the level of expertise that a sub can have. I mean, I'm dealing with very basic subs. Maybe on some larger scale projects like John was showing, then you're not dealing maybe with basic subs. You're actually dealing with a company that's led by an engineering team that has a work team. So then maybe you can share an IFC file with those guys as something that can be attached to a contract. Then the scope changes.
Interesting. So John, interested in your response, and it's certainly not either or let's say it's certainly not one ultimately is better. It's really what it's best for, and who would benefit, as well as, how easy is it to get set up in terms of doing this sort of stuff. So John, your comments.
Yeah, I think that both are viable solutions. The 2D, I think, in the work that Roderick's doing is, he's definitely helping out his bidders and subs by understanding the scope the way he sees it. My perspective is, if you can try to get them to take a step forward into the 3D world, then you can provide them a 3D version of all this, all these takeoffs where they can see it, spin around it, and get a better visual on it. Because, you look at some things in 2D, you're not going to see everything, like soffits, there's a lot of things that you could potentially miss. So I obviously prefer the 3D route. For me, once you do the 3D quantity takeoff, then it also opens up a lot of downstream uses for that 3D takeoff as well, for statusing, planning the work, doing, look ahead schedules, statusing in the field, creating a report that can track all the way through construction and into operations for some stuff, some different equipment or things you might want to maintain. So both work. I think, I think Roderick, a lot of the work that you're already doing, you obviously are modeling all this stuff. So I think, you could find a way to generate some 2D and 3D views with your quantity takeoffs, and that would maybe produce a similar result, maybe not as, nice of that. The one thing that I really liked about your workflow was the broken out report with the 2D previews. I think that's really, really useful. But I picture like a 3D isometric with your schedule placed on a layout with a graphic override to hide everything except for the stuff on your schedule, as being another way of seeing that. But
Yeah.
but you can also export. It's been a little while since I played with it, but you can also export ArchiCAD to a. I think it's a. What's the format? It's like an open PDF or 3D PDF format that you can actually view in Bluebeam as well. I'm not sure if all the quantities come through with that, but that would be another option to look at, just in terms of getting it into Bluebeam where people can view and see and mark up.
Mhm. One thing I'll just comment, I think that one small point that wasn't covered in just these comments, but we did mention earlier, is the feedback earlier on in the design process or through the design process. Because let's say, Roderick, I mean, you're obviously going to be doing estimation and looking at costs based on areas and some other preliminary data. But John's approach would certainly allow a more detailed costing to be done as the project is going along, and it will be kept up to date as revisions are made and things are pulled and pushed and different choices are made. I can see that there may be some more fluidity in that type of reporting
Yep.
once things are set up.
Yeah, definitely. Let's say my approach has that downside, that it does require lots of manual work and manual updates if we choose to start doing it too early into the process. So we have to sort of wait until things are pretty well defined and set before entering this part. So it doesn't allow, let's say, more generalized, let's say, preliminary costing, which was very interesting how John was showing me his approach to how to do it. This is more specific. But yes, it does have the negative that it's very manual.
Right.
I mean, I kind of, and this is something that I came up with years and years ago. So I mean, and I've sort of dragged it through the years. I haven't really modernized it too much, just because I haven't found an alternative that can provide the automatic reporting with the actual cutouts of the floor plan. And that for me is the sort of the deal breaker, in the sense of why to choose to use this for the specific applications that I give it.
Right. Now, a couple of technical notes. Some people were asking about Bluebeam and support on the Mac. I noticed that you're working with Parallels to run a Windows emulator on the Mac, and so you're running Bluebeam in Windows on your Mac. Is that the only way that you'd be able to do that?
No, it's not the only way, but it's the way that I prefer to do it. For years and years, I waited, and I was sort of on this big list of Bluebeam users asking, when is the Mac version coming? When is the Mac version coming? And then when it came, I just immediately jumped into it. I said, yes, please migrate all of my Bluebeam licenses over to Mac. This is now the savior. And then it was just clunky and cumbersome, and it didn't have all the features. So then within 2 months, I said, please give me my licenses back on Windows. So yes, it's a little bit of a drawback to having to use Parallels to be able to use it, just because I'm a Mac user. But if you're a PC user, then it's of course just its natural environment.
Yeah, and apparently Bluebeam has announced some sort of change of plan, saying we're not going to be supporting native Mac app. So I'm not sure what that exactly means, but clearly it was a big engineering challenge, and they perhaps are, just shifting their resources. So now, John, your approach is based on ArchiCAD and Excel, and ArchiCAD is as feature parity on Windows and Mac for almost everything, and Excel similar, maybe some subtle differences with Visual Basic or stuff like that in Excel, but overall, you could say, I'm guessing that what you do can be done on Mac or Windows. Is that right?
Yeah. Certainly the ArchiCAD side of things is exactly the same. You're right that the Mac operating version of Excel is different, certainly with the macros. We've been going through some updates to make it work better on Macs. It currently is functional on Macs, and it will continue to get better. It's some of the the coding challenges in Visual Basic have been eye-opening, but yeah, it is functional. So PC version works great, Mac version works.
Okay, and another tech note related to Roderick's presentation. So he was working with an iPad to do all of the going back and forth between 3D and the drawings. That is only available on mobile versions of BIMX, so that means iPad or Android. The desktop app for BIMX is more limited. It can give you, basic 3D, and I can't remember if they actually now have the desktop one has the working drawings ability to reference it. There is a new hybrid version that came out last year where in a web browser.
Right. On the browser you can do it.
Well, you can access the the layout sheets, and you can access the 3D model, but you can't flip between them with that interaction. It doesn't have, so it's maybe getting up to sort of 80% of what what that has, but actually wouldn't have presenter, wouldn't have all of those things. So maybe down the line, Graphisoft will continue to develop that browser-based version. So has the same features as the mobile version, or maybe the Mac and PC app will upgrade. But right now, Roderick was showing that on his iPad and broadcasting using a very inexpensive tool to basically just have his Mac show it on the screen. So the Mac was receiving the visual relay and putting it on screen, and that allowed us to see it in the webinar, and would also work for a projection screen, like in a live conference or a meeting room sort of thing. So that was a couple other technical things. Chris says, can you use numbers instead of Excel? John, you want to mention?
As of right now, no. That's kind of been a common question though, so I've never actually gotten into numbers to see how that might work. And I don't know if the work I've done in Visual Basic would transfer the same way into numbers. I don't know if there's the macro side of numbers like it is available in Excel.
I mean, there's formulas, but no macros.
Yeah.
Question, I guess this is going back to just your design. Alexis asks you, Roderick, what are the finishes for the flat and low slope roofs?
So in those cases, I'm doing a interesting application. I did this as I could say as an exercise or an experiment some years ago. And on many of my projects, I do TPO waterproofing membrane, basically because I've started doing lots of green roofs on some of my projects. So now I've preferred to just use TPO membrane on everything. And the experiment was to then apply, imagine a stone veneer. So we buy 2 centimeter thick volcanic lava rock, cut it, saw cut on both sides so it's flat, and we just apply it with adhesive straight on top of the TPO membrane. And it's worked really well for a long time. And I like it because it gives the impression of, let's say, something similar to a shingle roof or a slate roof, but by using a locally available volcanic rock. And at the same time, the approach of how I started doing this is because in the specific project or the specific resort where I do some of these projects, then we have the limitation that we cannot do, we can only do either tile or something that looks like tile or looks like shingle. And that if we do a flat roof, then it has to be a green roof. So the solution of the slate looking solution by applying it directly on the membrane allowed me to do very low slope roofs without having to think about the challenge of the overlap of one stone over the other, which then leads you to the minimum slope kind of conditions. So that's a way of just providing one flat, smooth surface on the roof and making it visually look interesting.
Okay, all right. Lots of considerations there. So a couple other questions from earlier. How many man hours go into your typical plan set with this level of detail? This is for Roderick, of course. And do you bill the clients for these hours, or do you add the cost to the total cost of the home?
The total number of man hours, I mean, of course, we have our control of hours, but I don't know it by project. It varies greatly from one project to the next. But I can just say that it's a lot. So sometimes, let's say on a large project, let's say maybe a high-end residence of $2.5 to $3.5 million bucks. That process may be about 3 months of work of at least 2 to 3 people involved in the process. Of course, with my time added to that on previously creating the model on a schematic and conceptual design phase, and then of course my time added to that on revision and constant involvement in the project as well.
Okay, excellent. And that $2.5 or $3.5 million hypothetical project, how many square feet were we talking about, or square meters?
Probably, let's say square feet, we're talking in the range of 12,000 to 14,000 square feet total, indoor and outdoor.
And so that would be some, I guess you divide it by 10 to, or 9 or 10 to get the meters. So we're talking about 1,200 to 1,500 meters, square meters?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, okay, cool. And with the iPad and question, do you recommend getting the largest screen possible?
Yes, definitely. Go for the big one. No questions asked.
Okay. And final question, just right for now, any tips on making colors true in renderings?
Colors true in rendering. So that's like for a separate training of days and days and days. I mean, geez, I mean that is so broad, and okay. I don't have a perfect solution. I've tried. I mean, some of the renderings that I quickly showed there were examples that we were trying to do in Cinema 4D, which came out pretty nice. However, it had the drawback, I mean, a very severe drawback, that I always like to do my renderings on a very large pixel size. And the reason for it is twofold. Let's say sometimes we may say, okay, we want to submit this project for an awards competition. So then if we do, I don't know, 1500 by 900 pixel size, that's useless if you actually need to print stuff at 300 dpi on actual paper and put it together into a book and submit it for the awards competition. Or if a client says, oh, these images are wonderful, I want to create a brochure for the project that you've designed for me. Then we're screwed, because if we don't have the images big enough, then we have to redo them all over again. So the exercise that we did with Cinema 4D, that was the bad part about it. It just needed absolutely crazy hardware requirements to be able to come up with the renderings at the quality that we wanted and at the pixel size that we wanted. And so I kept having arguments with support at Maxon over and over again. And it came to a point where they said, oh, well, but then what you need, you're an absolutely super pro user. I said, no, we're not. I just want renderings to look nice and to be able to do a book. That's all I want. So what they came back to me and said was, hey, if you need to do renderings this size, then you need not one computer, of course, then you need a whole bunch of computers to generate as a team. And you need each and every one of those computers to be absolutely identical hardware spec-wise. I said, that's not going to happen. I may have 10 computers here at the office, but some are newer, some are older, and I just want all of them to work together and to create a rendering farm. So we've sort of gravitated back to Atlantis, which was the tool that we used for many years, and it's actually worked better to be able to work within our ability and our hardware capacity instead of investing a crazy amount of money thinking that we want to be a rendering farm, which we don't.
Right. Okay. interesting practical issues, and as always, pushing the limits. So
Yeah.
this is probably the good place to finish up. We've gone 2.5 hours, so thank you both for your generosity of your time and just the inspiration that you give to all of us. So I know, Roderick, I'll be talking to you, about things that we're always in touch about a variety of things. But what's up for you coming up in the next this year? What are you looking forward to?
Looking forward to, well, we're about to finish up a really nice project that we currently have under construction, which we're very likely going to be submitting also for an award competition later on this year, and really looking forward to completing that project because it's just turning out, amazing. Starting up some new projects as well. So hey, basically just figuring out to keep pushing the boundaries and keep finding the clients willing to pay for it. That's the
Yeah.
biggest challenge.
Yeah, and just as a side note, Roderick has been involved in the Architect Marketing Institute programs and is a mastermind member, which means he's getting some individual coaching and assistance on the marketing side of things, and that built on top of having a fantastic track record with project creation and management. I'm expecting you to just keep going up level after level in terms of your firm's prominence and the types of work you're able to bring in. So congratulations and keep it going. John, you and we have some stuff we're working on, and just very quick recap, we're going to be together delivering master template plus the C5D data quantity costing workflow. John's going to be leading the charge on that, as well as on the training that'll be sort of bundled with it, so that we're looking at for April. Well, John's going to be working on getting that set up in the next little bit. John, talk about the big picture, just 2 minutes, like in addition to our work together, where you see things going this year for you.
Yeah, I'm excited for this year because there's been a lot of people reaching out, a lot of interesting consulting opportunities, working with different ArchiCAD firms, helping them kind of understand what their goals are with trying to take BIM to the next level in their offices. So yeah, I'm just excited to work with different people, kind of a wide range of, everything from, small interiors type projects to like the hotel project I demonstrated earlier. So it's, yeah, I'm excited to, just meet more users out there and continue to develop and fine tune my workflow. It's something that's will probably never really be done, but always just striving to be better and better. And so yeah, I'm excited for a lot of things coming up. Excited to be doing this collaborative AMT plus C5D template. I think that's going to be really exciting, and yeah, we'll have to. Eric, we've been talking about the example project to go along with that, and so I'm sure you'll be marketing here sometime soon that we'll have a little competition for that, which I think will be really interesting, and so I'm excited about seeing some models and putting something together.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. We'll give everyone the 1-minute summary. I'm going to be, because we're going to be building the new workflow onto master template, or implementing John's workflow in the context of master template. The best way to really prove that out is to have a project that it can be built on, just like he did the gymnasium there. So I'm going to be requesting submissions for any of you who use master template, you've done a project that you think would be interesting to get costing. Maybe it's in the process where costing would be literally useful, or just would be interesting to compare what a theoretical costing would have done compared to what your numbers are. So basically there'll be some, we'll be taking entries in the next few weeks and giving some of the top winners scholarships for the new workflow and the new class, or partial scholarships, things like that. So I'll be announcing that, and I'm looking forward to getting some interesting projects, things that visually have some appeal, as well as modeling and data are a good foundation for building out the workflow. So that's going to be really fun. So I see Roderick has at least turned off his, Roderick has dropped off. He has some urgent matters. So again, thanks, Roderick, thanks, John, and thank you all. If you have any follow-up questions, please just send them to support@bobrow.com, and we'll be back next month with another ArchiCAD user webinar. If any of you would like to be a guest, don't expect you to be astronauts, rocket ship, type of doing things that no one else in the world does. Just if you've done some interesting work and you'd like to share it with other users, talk about your process, I definitely would invite you to contact me, and we'll get you on one of these ArchiCAD user webinars. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully the recording comes out, and I'll be able to post that for reference on the ArchiCAD user website, and it'll be on my YouTube channel for a while. So it's my pleasure to share all of this with you, and thanks for being an ArchiCAD user. Bye for now.